All right, awesome. We are recording. So welcome. Today we're doing a webinar on mindful eating and actually making actionable steps towards this rather than just relying on the nebulous definition of mindful eating. So if we have not met yet, my name is Jackie Durand. I'm a registered dietitian and owner of Nutrition LLC. I've got all of my information here. I offer all sorts of different services between one-on-one virtual nutrition counseling, customized meal planning, and I have a 12-week online program that I run here as well. But basically, my philosophy as a dietitian is to eat real nutritious foods and find ways to modify our lifestyle so that we can eat a healthy, nutritious diet, maintain weight, maintain medical and health conditions, all with the help of food. All right, so on today's agenda, you'll remember that last month we did a webinar on the physical signs of eating and overeating. So today we're going to focus more on the emotional eating side of things. And I invite you to watch the recording of that last webinar as well. And I will send that to you via email after today's presentation. So we're briefly going to discuss some of the differences in that because it really is important to help distinguish some of the physical aspects from that mental as well. We're going to recognize some of the common symptoms of emotional eating and some of the consequences that we see in that process as well. And of course, we're going to learn how to start dealing with this in an actionable way. I'll give you some of my best tips and tricks and general rules for maintaining eating habits throughout the day, both physical and emotional. All right, so first things first, discovering why you are hungry is a really important part of the eating process and sustaining yourself throughout the day. So just like physical hunger, emotional hunger can be very strong, and it's really hard to control yourself in those moments a lot of the times. So what we aim to do in the process is simply recognize when this is happening, tell the difference between this emotional hunger and some of this physical hunger as well. Let go of the guilt that surrounds some of this emotional eating. We often berate ourselves and say, hey, why did you overeat? Why did you do that in these situations? And it actually perpetuates some more of that emotional eating. So finding a way in time to let go of some of these habits that you're experiencing, and then finding new ways to cope and to strategically remove yourself from these situations so that you can overeat less over a period of time is our general idea for getting rid of some of this emotional eating. But of course, we need to know what the difference between these physical and emotional hungers are, because we are eating for maintaining our physical bodies as well as our emotional bodies here as well. So you may have heard some advice to simply eat intuitively, listen to what your body is saying at any given time. But this can be really skewed advice and very unhelpful advice for a lot of people. And the reason for that is it's very hard to distinguish this emotional hunger and separate out when you're just feeling hungry emotionally versus physically. And if you've really had a skewed vision of this all along, you've dealt with weight issues, you've had a hard time controlling weight, you may not be recognizing hunger signals, you may not be recognizing emotional signals. And so your idea of eating intuitively may be different from someone else's. And you may see very few results if you are relying on your old standards for your intuition. So let's talk a little more about physical hunger. So like I said, we did a whole webinar on this last week, last month actually. So I'll link you into that. So we'll have some more information on the physical hunger and your blood sugar and how that's affected by things that you're eating and all of that. But just generally speaking, our physical hunger is a call for nutrients to come into our body. So every single cell within our cells relies on energy from the diet in order to function properly. And so we cannot simply avoid food for fear of emotional eating because we need to satisfy this physical hunger in the process. So naturally, our hunger is going to ebb and flow throughout the day. After breakfast tends to drop a little bit down, and then by lunchtime, that hunger tends to increase a little bit, and then on throughout the day. And so there's a relatively expected pattern that we see with physical hunger throughout the day. And this is a tool that really helps us to identify whether you're physically hungry versus emotionally hungry at any given time. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go. But some early signs of hunger to look out for, and things that you may have been overlooking in the past: irritability, headache, fatigue, dizziness, usually either mild or moderate to begin with. And usually the more physically hungry you get, the more that blood sugar drops in between meals, the more common these symptoms get, the stronger these symptoms get. But with physical hunger, you tend to see an increase in these symptoms rather than just an all of a sudden onset of these symptoms here. And then so as you ignore these earlier signs of hunger, there's these first four, and you drop lower and lower in the blood sugar, you start to see something like less control over your food choices, less control over portion sizes, more ravenous appetite. And that's because your body is ramping up those hormones. You have been ignoring them for an hour or two by now, right? The signal is getting stronger because you're ignoring it. And we often have these unfortunate signs that lead to overeating simply because of this physical hunger. So again, this is extremely important, because if you feel like you're out of control with your eating habits and you really think it's more of an emotional issue, you may have been ignoring these physical signs, and it may simply be a matter of being more in tune to these physical signs to help you curb hunger later in the day. All right, so some more symptoms of the emotional eating. So as I said, it's more of a strong, urgent craving. There's really more of an urgency associated with this. So you could be totally fine up until now, until we're talking about it, and all of a sudden you have a craving for cake, right? You have a trigger here. You're seeing a picture of someone eating cake, and therefore you have this craving for it, and that is an emotional response. If you were physically hungry, you would have noticed some of those signs probably a half an hour ago, little hunger pangs here and there, some of this decrease in your energy levels and things like that. And up to this point, you probably would have been okay. Now you're realizing you're actually hungry. That's more physical. Other more emotional eating things, you can't control how much you're eating, even if you're feeling full. This is very common. So you could be halfway through this cake here and you're physically full. You may not want to eat another bite, but you're either mindlessly watching TV and not noticing that, or it's still in front of you. It's still serving a purpose. It's still sweet and delicious. And so you feel the need to continue eating. And this is really no surprise. So eating in general, eating anything actually releases endorphins, or your happy hormones within your brain. And so it's a very cause and effect way to perk yourself up, make yourself feel a little bit better simply by eating. Other symptoms here, eating to unwind. So if relaxing at the end of the day means you eating something, that's usually an emotional versus a physical response. If you're full and you're thinking about food, this one is sort of a gray area, because usually in my household, we're thinking about what we're going to be having for lunch and for dinner at breakfast time, even though we're eating or have eaten in that moment. So that could be more a matter of a planning while you're, thinking about food and you're actually eating, or, if you're obsessing about what you're going to be eating or how much you can be eating, or how much you have eaten already, this may be more of that emotional response. Some other very common ones, anytime you're stressed, if you're recognizing that you're stressed or you're bored or you're feeling tired or upset about something, this is a very obvious cause and effect here. Okay, so what are some of our consequences here? Very acutely, we do have some immediate symptoms of eating past general satisfaction. And that's usually the issue with this emotional eating, right? It's one thing to be eating emotionally, but it's another thing to be really overeating in those moments as well. But the reason those are paired together is because if you're not physically hungry, you're emotionally hungry. And if you're not physically hungry, you're likely eating more than you need, right? So eating past satisfaction can certainly make you feel more tired, especially if you're eating sugary or carb heavy foods like pizza. That overload of carbs and sugar into your system can send all of your energy, all of that mental energy into your guts for digestion and take it away from your brain where it needs to be. So you may be feeling a little bit of a mental fog, feeling a little bit tired. This is very common after lunch as you start to hit a peak in your energy levels for the day anyway. So that afternoon tired, sluggish feeling that we usually feel. Bloating, upset stomach can all occur here as well. Digestive issues across the board can really be led to overeating and emotional eating too. So if you suffer from something like IBS or chronic constipation, diarrhea, things like this, can all be a symptom of simply overeating and emotional eating here as well. You're also going to see a very acute change in your blood sugar levels. So if you are diabetic or pre-diabetic, overeating can cause a spike in your blood sugar right away. And these sugars are actually transported around your blood by triglycerides. And so you may see an enhanced spike in your triglycerides very acutely as well. So when I say acutely, this is really the day of. So something that is really a cause and effect right after you're having a meal that is way too heavy. So more long-term here, if you are overeating consistently and getting more calories than you need, this can certainly lead to weight gain. If you're trying to lose weight, can make it really difficult to lose weight in this process here too. Excess triglycerides and excess fats in your blood as well, if you're simply overeating across the board, can raise your cholesterol, which can in turn also raise your blood pressure, especially if you are gaining weight here. Constantly raising up your blood sugar levels with too much food can create this insulin resistance within your body and lead to diabetes down the line, or poor diabetic management if you have it already. Gaining extra weight can lead to the development in arthritis and joint pain across the board. And there are many studies showing the links of overeating, emotional eating, weight gain with the correlation with depression and anxiety as well. So just a little bit of overeating, something that seems relatively harmless, can actually lead to some serious long-term problems here. So we want to make sure that we're really keeping this in check whenever we can. All right. Eating is life, is it not? Do we skip the cupcakes? Do we skip our birthday cake? Absolutely not. And the reality is that food is not only a physical need for us, but it really is part of our culture. It's part of our heritage. It's part of us being people. You think about the things that we celebrate, the way that we mourn different things. We are really surrounded by food. So there are such things as birthday cake, Thanksgiving turkey, National Donut Day, simply because we are creatures that love food, and that's fine. Every culture has their own distinctive patterns. So when we say, oh, I'm going over Italian or out for Mexican, it's because everyone has these traditional foods that they're celebrating with. So we end up in this struggle where we are trying to satisfy both physical and emotional cravings, both with food. And so it's a very tedious fine line between doing that well and overeating and really emotional eating in a negative way. So the big picture here is most of the time, if you can eat a nutritious, healthy, balanced diet, you're going to be able to manage the health conditions that you're looking to manage. Doesn't mean that you're unhealthy. If you do include some sweets and some fast food here and there, there is a little bit of wiggle room for some treats and things in your diet. So I like to go with a 90-10 split. So if 90% of the time you're relatively doing well, and then there's 10% for fun foods, that just gives you more of a guideline for things to go on. So if you were to look at the average of what you eat over the course of the day, if most of it looks good and there's a few extra things in there, maybe some French fries or some cookies or whatever it is, if you're in balance in general, this is really not an issue. If you start seeing that 10% is 20 or 30 and starts to increase and increase over time, and you're feeling less energetic and you're not feeling as well physically, you're gaining weight, all of these things, this is really the time to start tackling some of these emotional eating issues here in the end. And the reality is if you're trying to deny yourself, even if you feel really good about eating clean, whatever that means, right? Or you're doing this diet and you're really restricting yourself, and you find this this place where you're really not allowing this 10% in. likely you're going to be giving into those cravings at a time where you're at your weakest. So you've got this emotional thing going on, you're feeling stressed, and all of a sudden you're going to say, ah, hell with it. I don't care about this diet anymore. And then you really go off the deep end. A lot of those nice habits that you built over time end up falling by the wayside, and then you end up right back where you started. So what I recommend for my clients is, even if you are doing really well, even if I drew you up a meal plan that is the tip top of everything here, it's still great to include some of these favorite foods that you've been eating all along, just to make sure that you're still enjoying yourself in the process as well. All right, so let's talk more about this mindfulness aspect here. So this is my favorite way to really tackle overeating. Of course, we can draw up meal plans that are somewhat calorie controlled to make sure that you're eating within reason for your goals. But just having this mindfulness can really give you that edge over the habits that you're trying to take over here. So mindfulness is simply just acknowledging and accepting feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations, which isn't very helpful in the grand scheme of things, right? So this can be anything from planning and preparing your meals, really taking time to understand what you're doing, how balanced your meal is. And then as you're eating, it's not only the appearance and the taste of food, it's the smell of the food, it's how that food feels in your mouth. It's recognizing how hungry you're feeling before you're entering the meal, before you're cooking and serving yourself the meal, and during and after the meal as well. And as you're finishing up, you want to see how satisfied you're feeling, if you need seconds or not, and really just understand how the food is affecting you both physically and mentally. This is complicated though, right? Most of us have had busy days. Most of us have had other priorities aside from eating, especially at eating time. If you've ever eaten lunch while you were working or have kids, you know that getting 5 minutes to yourself just to sit down and eat mindfully isn't always possible. And so this is where things get really complicated. If we had time 3 times a day and then add in snacks in there to literally think all about food and not think about anything else, we'd be very imbalanced in the other way. We can't simply be thinking about food all the time. So there isn't time to always sit and fully experience this eating. And so what I like to do is pare my mindful eating tactics down into a few simple rules, so that if you're living by these, it gives you something concrete to go by, gives you a guideline, even though you may not be able to sit and think mindfully in that moment. All right, and my favorite one is planning ahead. So especially when you have busy days, maybe you're packing a lunch and knowing that you're going to be eating on the road or during a meeting or something, at least you know that you mindfully planned that meal to be balanced and appropriate for what your goals are. So it's calorie controlled if you're trying to lose weight, full of fiber, full of proteins, generally following this My Plate guideline here, getting the nutrients that you need. And so if you have this mindfulness, let's say first thing in the morning when you're packing that lunch, you can be mindless about it a little bit later when there may be less time to focus on food. So there's a big spectrum here in your planning process. And depending on how much time you have, how much interest you have in doing this, you could really fall anywhere here. And it may vary day to day, week to week as well. So really top of the line planning is really looking at the plan for the week as a whole, shopping, making sure you've got everything planned out to a T. You know what's for dinner, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all of that good stuff. And then really it could just be planning for the day first thing in the morning. So as you're sitting and eating breakfast, discussing with the household, hey, what are we going to do for lunch? What are we going to pull out of the freezer for dinner? That's a little bit of planning, but at least you have some sort of balance coming into this equation because you're thinking about it ahead of time. You may just have some staples on hand. Maybe you have 5 to 10 meals that you make typically throughout the week, and you just make sure that you've got the ingredients on hand for everything, and then you pull it together as you go. Or maybe you shop in the moment, you head to the grocery store, get whatever looks good and make a meal plan then. And maybe you're making fast food choices here as well. Maybe you're making some smart changes so that your fast food order is a little bit more balanced. So clearly, as the level of planning increases, the likelihood of you really going off balance in terms of your meals, off calorie balance and all of that decreases, right? So we want to be more planned whenever we can to offset any issues that we may have with calorie balance and control, especially when it comes to weight loss. Another one of my favorite rules is the 20-minute rule. And there has to be a couple of things coming into play here for this really to work for you. So the general premise here is that it takes about 20 minutes for you to recognize that you're actually full after eating. And so if you think about how much damage could be done, how much overeating can be done in that 20-minute span, it really can save you from eating a lot of excess calories here. So what do we need to put in place first? So first things first, if you're eating a meal that is too big for you and you're eating the whole thing and then waiting 20 minutes to decide whether or not you should have had that, most likely at the end of that 20 minutes, you're going to be feeling stuffed, a little over full, a little uncomfortable. So what needs to be in place first is making sure that you're taking just a small serving to begin with, so that you can start to gauge how hungry you're feeling, how satisfying these meals are at any given time. So what I suggest is maybe using a smaller plate than you normally do. If you're typically using a huge dinner plate, maybe get some smaller ones and eat maybe half of what you normally would. So serve yourself about half. Eat slowly, make a point to enjoy the food, understand the textures and the flavors, and then really enjoy all that. And then when you're done, set your fork down, socialize, you can get up and do the dishes, you can go out for a walk, whatever it is in that 20-minute span before you decide whether or not you're hungry or not, right? Because in that first 5 minutes after you're finishing that plate, you're going to want to eat. You're going to feel hungry. Your stomach hasn't signaled your brain that you're actually full just yet. So wait that full 20 minutes. And then as that time comes, reevaluate. And it's important that you really do this objectively. This is not a should I, could I eat situation. This is not how many calories do I have left for the day. This is simply how hungry are you feeling now that you've had something to eat. If you're equally as hungry, totally possible, then take another full serving. Maybe you really underserved yourself at that first one. You've done a lot that day. You can absolutely have some more. Maybe you're just feeling a little bit hungry, not quite there. Maybe have another serving of whatever the vegetable was, maybe a little extra piece of the protein, whatever it happens to be, but much less than you had originally served yourself. If you're feeling satisfied, but it tasted really good, maybe take a couple more bites of whatever that favorite dish was. Again, we're servicing both your physical and emotional side here. And so if that delicious mac and cheese tastes perfect today, then have another bite or two of that just for the sake of that emotional. And if you're good and you forgot that 20 minutes even passed by, then guess what? You've saved yourself a lot of calories. You've saved yourself a lot of anguish, not feeling well and all of that good stuff. And you can simply carry on with your day. So this really saves me and a lot of my clients a lot of grief throughout the day. And it really makes it intuitive, but it's structured in the same time to give you some sort of a guideline. So definitely keep this one in your back pocket. All right, and what I like to talk about too is my 3 to 4 hour rule. And this is really pertaining to your physical hunger. So after you've eaten a meal, let's say lunch, it's lunchtime here. You've eaten lunch at noon, 3 o'clock rolls around, you're starting to feel hungry again. I've had so many clients over the years say, I cannot stop my afternoon snacking. It's really out of control. Like, why can't I make it until dinner? Well, because you ate 3 hours ago, right? Your body is done with that food that you put in. Your blood sugar is dropping. You're getting irritable. You're getting tired. You need something there. So for you to be denying your body something that it actually needs, it's really no wonder you can't control that. And then by the time you finally give in, you're ravenous, you're out of control of that hunger, and you're overeating things that you wouldn't normally eat. This is the junk food time. This is when that happens, right? And so this is a really great gauge to use if you cannot distinguish between physical and emotional hunger. So what you can say is, okay, it's 1 o'clock, right? I ate an hour ago. I ate a relatively balanced meal. It was satisfying at the time. Maybe I'm not hungry. Maybe I'm bored, or maybe I'm stressed. So maybe I can work on some other emotional eating tactics to try to get to the 3 to 4 hours and see how that works. Or 3 to 4 o'clock rolls around, you say, yes, I'm physically hungry. There's a very good chance I'm not emotionally eating. I'm not going to feel guilty about giving my body the fuel that it needs to carry out the rest of the day. And so this is very helpful for distinguishing between these things if you really haven't experimented with this physical versus emotional understanding at this point. So when you are recognizing this emotional eating, ask yourself some of these questions here. So first and foremost, are you craving something specific? If you could eat a plate of broccoli or have a balanced salad, most likely that's more of a physical hunger situation. But if you're craving something specific, like we saw a picture of cake before, or if this sandwich is looking really good to you right now, and all of a sudden it's looking like you want to crave something specific, that's a symptom of emotional eating. And so that's very common. And so that can be a really good indicator of that emotional eating for you. Another one is really tuning into your stomach feeling. We often get that pit in our stomach when we're feeling hungry. You may notice it grumbling, or it feels like it's eating itself by the time you get to a meal after a while. But if you're really thinking about eating and you're really focusing in on what your stomach is feeling like, if you're emotionally eating or emotionally craving something, most likely you won't feel those same stomach sensations. And that's another good indicator there. Emotional eating can simply be mindless too. So this is something that's a little more difficult to track and to understand. If you have snacks sitting at your desk and you're just grabbing a handful as you're working, your mind is elsewhere. And so you're not focused on the food, and that becomes that absent-minded eating, which in turn is more emotional. It's sort of like that bored eating situation there, sort of that oral fixation rather than anything else. So just assess where this starts to happen to you. Is it the same time every day? What is that 3 to 4 hour window for physical hunger looking like? Does that coincide or does it not? What was that last time that you ate? What are you feeling? Are you bored? Are you stressed? Are you anxious about something? It can be happy things as well. So emotional eating is also celebrating things or rewarding yourself for getting through a meeting. Things like that can actually be emotional too, even though it's tied to a more positive note. All right, so my favorite way to deal with this emotional eating and really recognizing it is writing it down. So anytime you're putting pen to paper for something, it actually helps to solidify a thought in your mind. And if you've ever written a grocery list for yourself and then went to the store, hopefully with said grocery list, and managed to just remember everything on that list, it's likely because you saw it visually down somewhere and you were able to remember it. If you're creating a list in your head, most likely you're going to forget something. Most likely won't remember that you actually forgot something until you need whatever that grocery thing was, right? So when you're dealing with emotions, this is something that is rather nebulous anyway. Emotions can change and vary in consistency and all of this. And so if you're journaling and you're writing down and putting pen to paper what you're feeling, that can really help to distinguish some of these emotional eating patterns. So I do have a guide that I'll send you. I sent it with the first webinar as well. Just some prompts for eating and journaling and logging food as well. And what this can do is pinpoint times that you may be emotionally eating, if there are specific foods that you tend to crave in those situations, whether that's a very particular item or maybe salty foods, sweet foods, and that will help you recognize if you're craving something specific, then you know that, okay, this may be an emotional trigger for me. And it really helps to get a second opinion here as well. So with a lot of my clients, I do have regular meetings where we really look at these logs and develop these emotional eating patterns with a third party. So just having someone outside of yourself to say, okay, this is the pattern that I'm recognizing. Maybe you didn't see it. That can be really helpful in the process as well. So once you've identified some things, it may be helpful to reduce some of these trigger foods that you're noticing here. So I say reduce because eliminating something isn't usually necessary and can usually backfire on you as well. So most people do have a specific food that when faced with, cannot resist, must have. That's totally natural, that's fine. But if having said food near you all the time is a trigger and causes overeating all of the time, there may be something that you need to do about it. So I'd like to reduce access as necessary, and I'll tell you about some of these situations here. If you have something like chips or cookies in the house, and if it's there and the package opens, it's gone, maybe avoiding buying them, avoiding keeping them in the house. That seems relatively drastic, and it is. Maybe necessary for a point of time where you can sort of separate yourself from that food, right? So whether you're just not buying the chips at all, or maybe as you start developing a little bit more control, you're really being mindful of not getting too hungry before you're opening a bag of chips, for example. Maybe it just becomes a matter of buying a smaller size. So rather than buying a family size bag, you buy a smaller one, or you buy single servings of your favorite candy or whatever it is. So you're not as tempted. You have a more natural stopping point. This may make more sense. So those are really helpful if you really have that impulse control. You're really just looking in the cabinet, you're grabbing almost mindlessly. It really helps to have these natural stopping points. If you are more mindful of it and more in control of some of these habits, portioning out a serving size rather than sitting down with a whole bag of chips is really helpful. So just grabbing a small serving, and then putting the rest of the bag back, eating just what you've got, and then at least it's creating that natural stopping point for you as well. In some cases, finding a healthier alternative can be helpful. Although if you've got a food that you just love for every bit of what it is, finding an alternative is not really going to be a substitute. But if you find that you just like crunchy things, like you really like the kettle cooked potato chips and it's that crunch that you're after, maybe having some mixed nuts or something else that gives you that same sensation could be an alternative for you. So again, reducing these trigger foods, reducing access, depending on how comfortable and how controlled you feel with some of these things, can definitely be helpful. All right, and situational eating is important too. So not only is it the type of food that's available, but you may find yourself in certain situations that cause this overeating. TV is a huge one. So especially after dinner, you're getting tired by the end of the day. If you sit down with this whole thing of popcorn or a whole bag of chips, very mindless, very easy to just go ahead and eat that. And so watching TV is still possible. You don't have to cancel cable or any of that. But you could have a better action plan for dealing with this moment if you do find this is where most of your overeating is occurring. Parties, same thing. Maybe it's just having more food available to you. Maybe it's more mindless chatting and eating at the same time. Of course, stressful moments as well, finding some different coping mechanisms for that can be helpful. Another one that's really challenging for a lot of my clients is late night eating, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep. I have a lot of people that have the habit of going downstairs and grabbing something to eat as well. And so these are things that we work on an individual basis and really finding something that works specific for you. So again, not avoiding these things, but having some sort of action plan for the situation. So TV, for example, rather than sitting down with a whole thing of popcorn like this guy is doing, going with a single serving. So at least it's going to prompt you to get up and go back to the kitchen. And in that time, you can make a more mindful decision whether or not you actually need to do that. Finding something else to keep your hands busy here is really fun too. I have one woman that actually took up crochet after years and years of not doing it. And she started crocheting sweaters and all sorts of crazy things, which I do have a scarf that she sent me actually. simply to keep herself busy while she was watching TV. She wanted to keep her hands busy. So whatever it takes, whatever piques your interest here, lots of different solutions to these trigger situations. All right, moderation is key here as well. So as we said, making sure that you're not sitting down with a whole bag of something and just serving yourself a single serving. I'm using chips as a lot of examples here. So if you find yourself craving chips after this, you might know why. But lots of simple ways to still include a lot of these favorite things in moderation. So for example, if ice cream is your thing, one serving of ice cream, typical ice cream, is only a half a cup. So half of this, sorry, not a lot. But what you can do is bulk that up and create a lasting enjoyment in a situation, and really creating this feast for your eyes by serving it with some fruit as well. So we actually did this last night in my house. We cut up some strawberries, put them in a bowl, and then put a little scoop of ice cream right on top. And so it was satisfying for a number of reasons, physically for sure, but we also got that sweet tooth taken care of as well. We got our ice cream, but we also got fiber and vitamins and things in our fruit there as well. Same thing with chips. It's fun to have a fancy bowl. Any way you can make something exciting, put it in a bright bowl. Contrasting colors are great. So if you've got like a deep blue or a purple bowl with your yellow chips, it creates something that's very visually appealing and satisfying there as well. Again, this is something that's emotional, and bringing in something that's not food related, but emotionally appealing at the same time can be a great way to deal with this too. Birthday parties, have the cake, have a small slice, maybe skip the ice cream, and then get yourself away from the cake in those cases. Having a cookie for dessert is fine. Don't sit down with a whole box of Oreos. Have 1 to 2, which is the serving size, and then carry on with your evening. Fast food, this can certainly be an option too. I have a lot of people that will say, oh, well, I didn't do so well this week because I got fast food. Okay, fast food is fine. It's convenience. Maybe it's not the healthiest thing compared to some other things that you're eating. But if you got a small burger instead of a double quarter pounder or whatever else they have these days, and you got a small fry instead of a large fry, and you got a water instead of a soda that you usually get, you're moderating things. You're certainly doing much better than you had in the past, and you're fitting something in that's a little bit better for your diet overall. So don't tell me that you did bad. Tell me how you moderated a situation to make it better for yourself. All right. So back to that mindful eating idea, which we've been talking about the whole time, I guess, but the idea of sitting down and really recognizing how something tastes and feels in your mouth and smells and all of that stuff. We predetermined not a lot of time for this across the board, right? And so when you can implement this is at specific times, and likely the place where you struggle with overeating the most. So if this is your afternoon slump, maybe this is lunchtime, you're going out and getting a grinder and you really don't have control of your portion sizes there. Focus in on whatever that time is, something that's going to make the most impact for you to make a change in that moment, right? So if you're tending to overeat at one time, lots of calories coming in at that specific time, this is where you stop and breathe and just eat in that moment, and you'll likely find the ability to curb your actions in that moment too. Of course, planning is really important as well. So if that's a lunch or a dinner option, having something that's ready and planned out for yourself is a natural stopping point. It's not going to be as calorie dense as something that you just get on the fly. And most likely it's more balanced than grabbing a burger and fries for lunch while you're out. So some other mindful practices in those moments. Really the goal is to slow down. People know that I'm the slowest eater around, and it was never really just me being mindful for whatever reason. It just takes me forever. So take a lesson from me. If you're eating faster than me, then slow down, right? So set your fork down between bites. This is very simple. So rather than just continuing to keep pace with the fork inside your mouth, wait until you have chewed everything, swallowed, sat and thought about it for a second, then pick your fork back up. This is a natural stopping point for you to stop and take a break. If you're doing meat or anything that needs to be cut up, rather than cutting it all at once, like you would for a small child, cut one piece at a time. And that way, in between those bites, you're setting your fork down. When you're done, you're getting up, you're cutting another piece off. So it's really naturally slowing you down there as well. Sipping water between bites here is important too. And if you're socializing at this, you're eating with others, if you avoid talking with your mouth full, it will ensure that you're swallowing, you're taking some time to chat, and it's naturally slowing down that piece of that meal. So if you deal with any sort of indigestion, like upset stomach or nausea or even acid reflux, these practices can also help with that as well. Overeating and really flushing your system with food can cause a lot of indigestion across the board. And so you may find that just slowing down can actually relieve some of the symptoms that you're feeling there as well. Another big one is reducing these distractions. So mindless eating is a very easy way to overeat quickly. So if you are reducing things like the TV watching, so if you watch TV while you're eating dinner, try to eat with the TV off, do more socializing, or if you're eating alone, at least it's creating a space for you to be mindful in that moment. Scrolling on the phone is a more recent development in mindlessness here, but keeping your phone away from you while you're eating. And a big one for a lot of working people, taking an actual lunch break and not just sitting on your computer and shoveling food into your mouth as you're trying to finish something is a great way to slow it down, reduce those distractions, and really allow yourself the time that you need to mindfully eat. All right, we're almost done here. So last, but we need to really work on some of the emotional outlets. So once you've identified where the emotional eating is happening, you've made some reductions in those trigger foods and situations, you really need to understand how to deal with your emotions in a different way rather than relying on food. So if you are stressed eating, you're bored eating, you're feeling upset about something, whatever it happens to be, if you're turning to food in those moments, it may be time to find an alternative, at least some of the time, right? Old habits die hard. Your brain is wired a certain way. You have a cause and effect. Food is very good at giving us that immediate happy response, right? And so this is going to be a very hard habit to break completely. And no one's expecting you to do that completely. But if you can find something else to be doing to reduce that total amount of stress, to take your mind off of the situation without food, at least occasionally, you're going to be much better off. It's going to help you curb that eating. It's going to help you get to your weight goals just naturally here. So there are a few ideas here. Exercise is a great way across the board. So whether that's taking a walk or going into an exercise class or something like that, you get the added bonus of not only burning calories and working out your body, but it's actually reducing stress in that moment as well. If you are a celebratory eater, like a lot of us are, maybe instead of planning like a dinner out, a celebratory dinner, maybe you're doing something fun instead. Maybe you're going out mini golfing or doing some other sort of fun activity that can be just as satisfying as a meal would be at your favorite restaurant. So lots of options here, no wrong answers. So really just find out what works best for you here. All right, so where do we begin with this? And the very short answer is if there's some sort of idea here, one of the rules, reducing triggers, whatever it happens to be, that resonated with you, that is where you begin. This is not something that you need to implement all of these different tools all at once, or even implement any of the tools. Maybe it's just one little thing that really came up for you today. Even the littlest things can make a big shift in the way that things are going for you long term. So don't overthink it. Just start with the one thing that is resonating with you today. Try to keep it in mind as you plan out the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and just see where that takes you. This is being recorded, obviously, so you can come back and take a look at some of the other tips. Get re-inspired, get some other tips that may help you further down the line once you've implemented this one. And just go there. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. You don't need to replan your life around this mindful eating, but take it for what it is. All right. And the other thing is getting help. So as we mentioned, especially with the food logging, it's nice to have a third party, someone else that can help you assess the situation, help you recognize some of the patterns, come up with ways to get around some of the struggles that you're dealing with personally. And so my programs are designed to help with that and really helping to recognize the physical and emotional hunger, tackling that physical aspect with things like meal planning and working on that meal timing that we talked about. And so I've got that 3-month program as well with the weekly self-study modules to help with all of that stuff. We do a 7-day customized meal plan as well, weekly office hours for support, and I'm available via email at any time as well. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to contact me. My email is below here. I'll also be sending you a summary and the video recording after today as well. So you can feel free to email me back from there as well.